Texas. It is my honor to welcome the next governor of Texas, Beto O'Rourke.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here and taking some time out of your day to join us and to welcome someone from far west Texas in El Paso. We're grateful to be back here in Dalhart again. And Selene, we're so happy for the welcome and the introduction. Here you are right there. And the fact that you all would open up this establishment to bring people together. And we're happy that everyone is here. You welcome the Republican County Chairwoman. We're glad that you're here. Trump supporters, Biden supporters, really does not matter to me. What's most important is that we're all Texans and we have an opportunity to work for the betterment of this state and by extension, the betterment of this country. And so I'm looking forward to the conversation that we're going to have here today. I'm back here in Dalhart because the first time I came out, I was a member of Congress and I served on the House Veterans Affairs Committee. And I came out here to visit the local VA clinic and understand how we were taking care of veterans, not just in this part of the Panhandle, but veterans who came in from other states, including Oklahoma, New Mexico, and points even further beyond. What was happening in Dalhart was truly innovative, and I wanted to learn about it and share that with those in other parts of Texas, other parts of the country, to make sure that we were delivering on our promise that we made to every veteran when they first enlisted in the United States military, willing to put their lives on the line for all of us. I met Melissa, who was a nurse practitioner at the clinic in Dalhart. She was using the latest in telemedicine and video medicine to connect veterans here with care that they would otherwise be denied. And we were certainly seeing those problems in other parts of the country. So I just want to begin with that I've been to Dalhart before, seen some things that really make me proud of what you all have been able to do. Messages that I've learned here that I've carried throughout the rest of the state and the rest of the country. A few things that I want you to know about me. I'm making sure that we create better jobs that pay more for any Texan who wants to work. Right now, 4 out of 10 working Texans do not make a living wage in the state. That means they're working 2 jobs, 3 jobs sometimes to try to make ends meet. It means that they're on public assistance. It means that sometimes they're sleeping in shelters, on the streets, don't have a reliable home to go to. I want to make sure that we are paying enough so that anyone working full-time can work just that one job and cover their expenses, put something aside for the weekend, and make sure that they're providing the best possible quality of life for their kids and their grandkids. Second issue that I wanted to bring up is making sure that we do a better job for our public schools. And that means paying our public school educators what they are really worth. Right now, on average in the state of Texas, the school teacher is underpaid by about $7,500 against what a school teacher is paid nationally. That means that those school teachers as well are also working 2nd and 3rd jobs, or they're leaving the profession altogether because they just cannot afford to deliver quality education to our kids. They've got to go find a job that pays a little bit more, or one in which they're shown the respect that they've earned and that they deserve. When I'm governor, I want to change that. I want to pay teachers what they're really worth, increase those salaries, ensure that we retain them, do things like canceling the STAR test this year so we don't add any more high stakes or high pressure into the lives of kids and teachers who are already seeing too many high stakes and too much high pressure. So turning around public ed is going to be an important priority for us as well. And the third one, last one, is making sure that more people can see a doctor. More people can go to a mental health care provider. More people can fill a prescription and be healthy enough and well enough to go to work or to finish their education or to raise a family or to do whatever it is they want to be able to do that allows them to fulfill their promise over the course of their life. In order to do that, as governor, I'm going to expand Medicaid in the state of Texas. That's going to bring over $10 billion additional per year into this state, into communities just like this one here in Dalhart. It allows us to hire more doctors, more nurses, more providers, more mental health care professionals so that more people get connected with the care that they need. Right now, the largest provider of mental health care services in the state of Texas is the county jail system. So we've got a lot of people with untreated mental health care issues who literally get arrested on purpose to be taken to the one place that they think they can get the care that they need. By expanding Medicaid at a time that the federal government will pay 90 cents on the dollar, we can bring in those billions of dollars into our communities, hire more doctors and providers, connect more people with care, and we can also do this, and I know everyone, Republican or Democrat, is going to agree with this one, we can also lower property taxes, because right now, when someone goes to the hospital, doesn't have insurance because we haven't expanded Medicaid, they're still going to need care, but they're unable to pay for it. All of us will end up footing the bill as a consequence. So expanding Medicaid, as Oklahoma did with a Republican governor, as Arkansas did with a Republican governor, as New Mexico did with a Republican governor, and as Louisiana did as well, it just allows us to do the right thing by and for our fellow Texans. That's it, those three things. Nothing extreme or on the edge of either party about that. Great jobs, world-class schools, and the ability to see a doctor so you're healthy enough and well enough to live to your full potential. That's what I'm campaigning for. As governor, that's what I'm going to focus on. And that's in large part because what I'm hearing back from the people of this state, whether I'm in the Panhandle or in the Rio Grande Valley, is that these are the things that bring us together. And at a moment that we are far too divided and fractured and polarized and being pitted against one another because of whatever meaningless differences there are between us, we need an opportunity to join forces and get on the same common ground and do some big, important things for the people of Texas. That's all of us, the people of Texas. But in order to do that, I'm going to have to win this election. And it's going to take all of us doing all we can to get behind these issues and get away from the culture wars, the division, the things that end up separating us from one another. Whether it's what happened in the last legislative session, where they made it harder for almost every Texan to vote and to cast a ballot, or denying every woman their ability to make their own healthcare decisions, their own choices about their own bodies and their own future. Whether it is this fixation on transgender kids as though that's the most important pressing problem in Texas, instead of the fact that 7 out of 10 fourth graders cannot read at grade level in this state right now. We got to get back to the basics and the big things that can bring us together, improve them, and make sure that this state is the best possible state to work in, to create jobs, to raise a family, and to send your kid to school. Those are my goals as a fourth generation Texan. I hope those are the goals of everyone in this room. Last thing that I'm going to say before I turn the floor over to you, because I'm really interested in hearing what you have to say. We may not all agree, and we probably don't. Not on every issue, right? I've been married for 17 years, and even between my wife and I, we don't agree on everything all of the time. Some of you voted for Donald Trump last year for president. Some of us voted for Joe Biden. As I said earlier, that's not really the most important thing to me. It's what we can do together going forward. Even if you don't vote for me in this election, if I win, I will be your governor. And it's my responsibility to serve and represent you just as effectively as I would anyone who voted for me. This has got to be about all of us at this time, bringing everybody together and doing the big things in Texas. So, to everyone who came out to see us here and welcome us back to Dalhart, we're grateful to be with you. So excited to listen to what you have to say, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. Cynthia Cano, who's in the back of the room, if you'll raise your hand, she'll recognize you. We'll bring you into the conversation. And again, you don't have to agree with me, you don't have to support me or vote for me. I'd love it if you do. But even if you don't, I'm looking forward to what you have to say. We just ask that everybody have a civil conversation here today, even when we disagree. And that's it. Ms. Cano, we'll turn it over to you.
All right, if y'all raise your hand if you have a question.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. I appreciate that. Or you know what? Just raise your hand. I'll recognize you. Yeah, go ahead.
So how feasible would it be to get rid of the STAR testing? Does that affect any federal funding? And how it's very expensive, the STAR testing. Where would that money go? Would it go back into the schools, like directly into the schools, or does it have to be something else? And how, I know some schools get funding based off showing progress, is that gonna go away where there's not that pressure of showing that progress, or is there gonna be a different one?
Questions about the STAR test and how feasible is it for us to do away with it or replace it with something else. So I think at a minimum this year, we should do away with it at least for this school year, because you've had 2 years of learning loss for almost all of these kids. It is in no way going to effectively measure their progress or their potential or the hard work on the part of the teacher, who's literally not just been there for classroom instruction, but has kept some of these kids alive, who lost their grandparents, whose folks have lost their jobs. This teacher is a lifeline right now, and I want her or him to be able to focus on connecting with those kids. But going forward, what if we replace the STAR test with something that is less punitive and more of a diagnostic? Where do we have needs? Where do we need to send resources in this state? Who's doing a great job? How do we celebrate that and replicate it across the state of Texas? You asked whether there would be a federal consequence if we were to replace the STAR test with something else. Texas is actually the outlier. I think we're the only state, or one of the only states, that requires passage of the STAR test to complete graduation from high school, which I think is completely unnecessary. It is how our schools are graded, A through F, and it's the only score. It's the only test that goes into the grading of our schools. It can result in money being taken away from certain schools and certain school districts. And so if you're struggling connecting with those kids, and those kids aren't performing well in the STAR test, the last thing we should be doing is taking money away from those teachers in those school districts. They probably need a little bit more assistance, not less. So my vision of this, which is just a reflection of what I've heard from teachers, is that we have something that's more of a diagnostic that just measures how we're doing, how kids are performing, and we supplement that with in-person visits to classrooms to watch the performance of those teachers, learn where they're strong, see where they have gaps, find out how we can help them and assist them with additional resources. Whether we have problems like too many kids in the same classroom, class size is a real challenge, too much paperwork for these teachers to have to fill out instead of focusing on classroom instruction. Listen to them, because we're losing teachers at a frightening rate in the state of Texas. 1/3 of Texas teachers leave the profession in the first 5 years. And right now, a majority of teachers are thinking about leaving altogether because of everything they've been through over the last couple of years. So whether it's through pay, focus, and attention, changing how we do standardized testing, I want to make sure that we keep these teachers and treat them with the respect that they deserve and that I believe that they have earned. Thanks for asking. Other questions, other thoughts, comments? Sir?
My wife is an immigrant. My daughter's dual citizen. I look around at other states where both undocumented and documented immigrants have a chance to have say in the politics that affect them locally. I was wondering if you have a position on how we could further integrate immigrants into our society.
It's a really good question. Just to repeat it for anyone who didn't hear it, gentleman says that he is married to an immigrant. Their child has dual citizenship. How can we, the last part of the question was, how can we better integrate immigrants into our communities? And I think it goes without saying, but maybe bears repeating, that this is by and large an immigrant state. Some of us came over a week ago. Some of us, I'm a 5th generation Texan, and my family came over from Ireland, and we're working on the railroad until they stopped in El Paso. But by and large, we came from other places and found a home here in Texas and made it stronger and more successful, and I would argue safer, by the presence of these immigrants over time. A couple of things that I believe, and I think these are our basic Texas values. One, anyone wanting to come to this country should follow the law. We are a nation of laws, and we want to make sure that people follow them. That ensures that there is order where our country meets the rest of the world. But I think we can also agree that our laws, which haven't been updated since Ronald Reagan was president, are badly out of date with the needs and the demands and even the values that we have here in Texas. A guest workers program is something that a lot of people have talked about. We were in La Mesa, Texas with a cotton grower there, and he said, if I did not have immigrants who are willing to work on this land, I wouldn't be able to produce what I'm able to produce right now. I depend on this, Beto. Please make sure there's a legal way for people to come here and be integrated legally within our economy. You mentioned some of the undocumented immigrants. These are people, in many instances, who came here at a very young age, some 2 or 3 years old, brought here by their parents, who still do not have permanent status in this country. I think Texas should help take the lead in legalizing them and ensuring there's a pathway to citizenship for them. They're contributing far more than they're able to take right now. They'll contribute even more if they have full citizenship. Starting businesses, working in public service. Many of them already serve in our armed forces. We are grateful and proud of them for doing that, but let's allow them to also fulfill their true potential. And then last thing, I mentioned the last major rewrite of our immigration laws was back in 1986. Let Texans, Republicans, Democrats, rural communities, big cities together lead in rewriting our immigration laws so that they match our needs. And it sounds like you and your family should be at the table when that's happening, because you understand that, see the value in it, and know how we can make it better. And I'd love to work with you on that going forward. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Yes, sir.
Workman's compensation.
Can I let you use this so everybody can hear?
Workman's compensation. You know, the atrocities that are happening to me right now, you know, things that I have to deal with just to be able to be treated, you know, it's horrible, you know, and something needs to be done about it. You know, I got injured because of negligence, you know, of the company that I was working for, you know, and they gave me workman's comp. I can't see a doctor, I can't get my medicines, I can't, nothing.
I mentioned earlier that I want to make sure this state creates jobs that pay enough so folks don't need to work a second or third job. But I should have added to that I want to make sure that when you work one of those jobs, you are fully protected in the workplace. And should you be injured, that there is recourse for you to recover damages, and not only so that you can be made whole, but to send the signal to some of these larger corporations that there are going to be consequences if you're not looking out for your workers. And there'll be expensive consequences at that. Often that is the only way to get these corporations to do the right thing. I'm not talking about mom and pop businesses like the one that we're in right here, this taqueria. I'm talking about these corporations that are making billions of dollars here in the state of Texas, many of them operating in the panhandle, who are not only not sharing that wealth with the workers who helped to produce it in the first place, but are endangering so many of those workers right here in the panhandle. And if we don't have the ability to address this in our courts, if we cannot depend on justice in the state of Texas, then you're going to continue to have these problems. And your story, as you know, is not an isolated one. We are seeing and hearing this all across the state of Texas. So making sure that we have reform in how we adjudicate these problems so that people can recover damages that, again, help them, but also help everyone else by sending the signal to big corporations that we're going to have a level playing field in Texas. That's a priority of mine. And I'm going to make sure that we work with Democrats and Republicans to get that passed in the first legislative session that I'm governor. Thanks for asking. Appreciate it. Sir.
So I read on your website one of your issues is,
I read on your website that one of your issues is always following the science.
Yes.
As far as COVID restrictions go, we're real close to Red River, New Mexico, and they had a Democratic governor. And their mom and pop businesses were just destroyed because of COVID restrictions. Whereas in Texas, we've had, under Governor Abbott, we've had Amazon move to Amarillo. We've had mom and pop shops move from New Mexico over here because of their restrictions. So say a 10th wave of COVID happens, or Ukraine decides to blow up or something. Well, how would you protect the economy and businesses here in the uncertainty of the future?
Thank you for asking that question. I think the best way in a state as big as this one with 254 counties is to, whenever possible, defer to local leadership. You all know better than I ever will what works and what doesn't work in Dalhart. Local control should be the watchword not just of one party, but of this state and our government. The unfortunate thing is that in the midst of this pandemic, we had local officials, and there were Republicans and Democrats, school board trustees, county judges, and mayors who were prevented from making the best decisions for their constituents and their communities. So in Dalhart, the decision might have been to keep these businesses open and to ensure that we're deferring to job creators here. In other communities like my hometown of El Paso, which was the deadliest city in America for COVID deaths last summer, we might want to allow the county judge to impose certain restrictions to keep people alive. We had not one, but 10 mobile morgues set up in El Paso because so many people died so quickly from COVID. But instead of allowing the county judge to do that, Governor Abbott prevented him from being able to require these public health safeguards in El Paso. So the short answer to your question is, I want to defer to local leadership here in Dalham and Hartley County, and Dalhart, the city itself. You all are going to know the best way to look out for one another, and I trust that. And then as governor, when we're making statewide policy, yes, let's always look to the science, to the best experts in public health, to our medical professionals, and follow their lead. I want to make sure that we do both, protect one another and keep these businesses open so they keep these employees going. Thanks for asking the question. Appreciate it. Yes, sir.
I have
Can I
kind
let
of
you
a-
use this so everybody can hear?
Okay, sure. I have kind of a two-part question.
Sure.
For the record, can you tell us your position on the Second Amendment and gun rights for Texans?
Yes, and then you have another part
Yes.
to the question? Yes.
Yes.
So we have to defend the Second Amendment. We have to make sure that we return to the proud tradition of responsible gun ownership here in the state of Texas. Probably like everyone here, I grew up with firearms in the household. I grew up learning how to use a firearm and also the responsibility and accountability that comes with having one. I want us to always cherish that tradition and return to it because under Greg Abbott, we now have permitless carry that allows anyone to carry a loaded gun in public without a background check, without any vetting, or without any training whatsoever. As a result of that, we're seeing a spike in gun violence across the state of Texas. We are missing common sense legislation like universal background checks, like safe storage laws, like extreme risk protection orders that would protect the Second Amendment while doing a better job of protecting the lives of those in our communities. We have 4 of the worst mass shootings in US history in this state just in the last 5 years. And that doesn't have to be our future or our fate. We can change that, and we don't have to compromise our defense of the Second Amendment to do that. One other thing that I want to add, because I think this is probably on a lot of people's minds, you heard my statement about how I feel about AR-15s and AK-47s. I don't think that anyone apart from a battlefield or a theater of war should own one or have one. I know that many people here feel differently about that and own AR-15s and AK-47s and use them and own them responsibly. I just want you to know I respect that, but I also want to make sure that I'm always honest with you about how I feel on these issues. And lastly on this, the reason that I have that position on AR-15s and AK-47s is those 2 weapons specifically were originally designed for use on a battlefield. The high impact, high velocity round shreds everything inside your body, the tissue, the organs. You bleed out before we can get to you and save your life. I saw the consequences of that in El Paso in 2019 when somebody with an AK-47 killed 23 people in a matter of minutes in my community. The primary healthcare professionals, the emergency room physicians at the hospital did their best but had a hard time saving the lives of those people. We, in my opinion, have to get those off of our streets. But anyhow, that's my longer answer to your question. What was your second one?
So the second part of my question has to do more with how you would plan to, do you have a plan to buy back firearms? Is that going to be mandatory? I think that's the primary part of this question.
Yeah. There's a very good chance that if I win this race, I'm going to be working with a Republican majority legislature, or a legislature that's divided, one house controlled by one party, one house controlled by the other. The beauty of this democracy is that it's going to force us to find consensus, and I know this is a dirty word among a lot of us, but even compromise. That means that we've got to find the common ground where we can agree. And where I think most gun owners and non-gun owners, Democrats and Republicans are, is making sure that we at a minimum have universal background checks. So anyone purchasing a firearm has to have some kind of vetting before they can carry that. Most Texans would agree that the license to carry program that we used to have, where if you wanted to carry a gun in public, that's fine. Just make sure there's a background check and some training before you do that. I agree with that. Most Republicans and Democrats agree with that. I'd love for us to return to that. There may be other parts of consensus like red flag laws or universal, extreme risk protection orders, and then safe storage laws that ensure that if we have a youngster in the house who shouldn't have their hands on a firearm, that firearm is safeguarded against them taking it, using it against themselves, or using it against someone else in the community. That's where I would start. That's where I think we can find some common ground and some consensus, even if we're working with the Republican majority legislature. Thanks for the questions. Appreciate it. Yes, sir.
So to kind of piggyback off what he just said, whenever you have to use an AR or an AK for rodents like hogs, you have to have a high caliber round to kill those because they kill our farm ground and all that. So what about that right there? Because yeah, the farmers there, because you can't use a big rifle just to shoot them one by one.
Yep. So using an AR-15 and AK-47 to take out hogs, which are an invasive species across the state of Texas, and cause hundreds of millions of dollars of damage each year, if not more than that, is probably the only legitimate reason I've heard for having an AR-15 or an AK-47 in civilian use. So I hear you on that. And again, I just want to acknowledge those who are here and own these weapons. I trust use them responsibly for the reasons that you just gave. It's just after a shooting like the one that we had in El Paso, or the ones in Midland, Odessa, or Sutherland Springs, or Santa Fe High School, so many times that these high caliber weapons are used against human beings. I feel like we've got to do something better and different, because if we continue to treat it the same way and expect a different result, that's the definition of insanity. So I'll look forward to trying to find some common ground with you and others for how we do a better job of protecting your Second Amendment right, which is enshrined in the Constitution, and that's not going anywhere. We want to make sure that we support it, but that we also do a better job of protecting the lives of the people in this state. I know that we all agree we can do both of those things. The magic is going to be in finding where we can compromise and find consensus to move forward. Thanks for asking.
All right, here's our next question.
So a couple things on what you're talking about for your compromises for Second Amendment protection. The first, you said, was universal background checks. I'd like you to expound upon that. Like, what do you consider to be a universal background check?
Yes.
Second was the red flag laws or the Emergency Protective Act. How do you propose that we, as law enforcement, enforce something like that without violating someone's Fourth Amendment?
Thank you for asking the question. Thank you for your service to the community, and one of the toughest, most important jobs that any of us can take on, and we are grateful to you for doing that. On this question about universal background checks, perhaps the best way to answer it is to use a real-world example. I briefly mentioned the shooting in Midland, Odessa, where 8 people were killed in 2019. The gunman went to a licensed firearms dealer and was unable to purchase the gun because he couldn't pass the background check. So he went and privately purchased a gun from a private seller. Right now in Texas, that's exempted from a universal background check. So when I say universal, I mean if it is a gun dealer, if it's at Walmart, if it's somebody selling out of the back of their trunk, they have to perform a background check. We're going to be able to save lives as a result. Sorry, did you have something?
Yeah, so on that, how do you enforce that?
You know, others, it's a great question, and I would love to defer to your experience on this issue. But we know that other states have implemented universal background checks that have improved public safety and kept guns out of the hands of violent criminals and others who would do any one of us and anyone in law enforcement harm. We know that more sheriff's deputies and cops have been gunned down in Texas than in any other state. So I think it's in our mutual interest to find a way to answer that question. But I really think that you and your colleagues should be at the lead of that, because as you just suggested, you're the one tasked with enforcing the law. And we want to make sure that we find the best way to do that. So I think a mix of looking at what other states have done successfully and what you've experienced and what you think can work is what's going to make sense here in the state of Texas. And you had another question on
how to enforce the red flag or the emergency protection?
Yes. So, for those unfamiliar with the term red flag law or extreme risk protection order, this is where someone has exhibited behavior that would cause us to think that they may shoot themselves, and we have far too many gun suicides in the state of Texas, or shoot somebody else. They say, hey, I can't wait to get into school and kill my classmates, or kill my brother, or kill my girlfriend. When they say these things, when we know that they are going to harm themselves or someone else, there has to be some recourse, some way of getting that firearm out of their hands before they use it. Now, we have to have due process because we still need to protect their Second and Fourth Amendment rights against, Second Amendment, right to bear firearms, Fourth Amendment, unreasonable search and seizure. So this has to go through a judicial process. A judge has to determine that there is a public interest in safeguarding against a security or safety threat from this individual. And then that gun has to be returned to that person once that threat has passed. Again, I would probably defer to you and to others in states that have adopted these extreme risk protection orders so that we do this right, learn from what has worked or not worked elsewhere, and apply that to Texas. My feeling is that probably no state better understands firearms than this one, so we should really be leading in this. I would say that our license to carry program that we had up until last year was really one of the best in the United States of America. It allowed people to carry publicly, which we agree with, but it protected the public in the process. One last thing, there's a Vietnam era veteran in El Paso who was not happy with my comments about AR-15s and AK-47s, wanted to give me a piece of his mind. So I went over to his house, we had coffee, he told me, look, I've got AR-15s, Beto, I use them responsibly. I used a weapon that looked a lot like this when I was in Vietnam. Here's why I disagree with you. And I heard him out, we respected our differences. But then he said this, he said the thing that really scares me about permitless carry is that he's a firearms instructor in El Paso. And he said some of the folks who are trying to get their license to carry permit, who have to go through the mandatory training, come in and I'm their instructor and they don't know which end of the gun the bullet comes out of. And he said now those folks are on the street with no vetting, no training. Come on in, you're good. With no training whatsoever. So let's get back to the tradition that we've had in Texas for a long time. I know we can, I know most of us can probably get around that and agree on it. Again, thank you for being here.
Okay, this is gonna be our last question right here.
Yes, sir.
On immigration. I immigrated to this country in 1956, which was 66 years ago, as an 18-year-old. The restrictions on immigrant weapons are believable compared to today. I had to have a guarantor before I left that I would not be a burden to the state, which means you can't get any help from the government. I had to serve in the military, which I gladly did, and get VA benefits from the list that year that you talked about earlier. When I see what's happening today, and maybe let me just say one thing. I think, unfortunately, there's an image worldwide about the United States which is wrong. Mine was Frank Sinatra had a penthouse overlooking the Central Park in New York, and boy, someday I can get there. Very difficult to get there.
Thanks for being here, and thank you for your service to our country. Like many immigrants, you chose to serve this country in uniform, and you were willing to give your life for all of us, and I'm grateful to you for it. And there are a lot of immigrants today who, though not citizens, legal permanent residents, are serving in the Marines, in the Army, the Air Force, and the Navy right now. We're grateful to all of them, and anyone who would be willing to serve.
I had no choice.
You had to. Thank you nonetheless.
Draft.
You were drafted. So I think the spirit of your question is, how can we get to a far more orderly process than the one that we have right now?
And less expensive.
And less expensive.
If you really want to come here, I mean, talked about 2 jobs. I was a messenger and then a cab driver in New York to get through.
So right now, if you had a sister, say, in Mexico who wanted to immigrate here to the United States and join you, her wait time to come here legally is over 20 years. And so it provides this unintended incentive for people to try to get in the front of the line because the line is so ridiculously long, just does not make sense. Or to cross in between ports of entry and to arrive here undocumented. None of us want that, including your hypothetical sister. I think she wants to follow the law as well. That's why I centered my answer earlier to this idea that we need to rewrite our laws so that there's a legal, orderly path for anyone who wants to come here and contribute by working, and you mentioned a guarantor, by working and making sure that they are not a burden to this country, but instead are contributing to the success of this country. We want to make sure that those seeking asylum and refuge have their ability to legally process their claims. And if their claims are legitimate, they stay. If they're not, and I know some people don't like this, they have to be deported back to their country of origin. And then this is probably the most important thing, but it's the toughest thing, and it's the hardest thing, so it never gets done. We have to address the issues in those countries from which people are fleeing right now, or they will continue to come here. So after all of these civil wars in Central America, the drug trade that we have going on there right now, the hollowed out institutions, the desperation, people are going to continue to choose to come here. I think we have an interest in helping to fix some of those problems there. There's no wall high enough. There's no policy punitive enough to keep out that kind of misery and suffering. And so I think we need to help address that right now. Last thing on this, in researching my family history and looking at the Irish who left that island back in the 19th century, they were literally starving to death, and they had no choice but to try to leave. And they came here as miserable as a human being can be here. And there were a lot of people who were really angry about the Irish coming here, being a drain on America and changing our values and our culture. So we got to remember that every wave of immigrants has ultimately made us stronger, but we got to find a legal, orderly way for them to do it. And I appreciate you pointing that out.
That's the priority of how to make it legal. We don't have enough workers, maybe not full immigration, but a work permit. I mean, I don't
There you go.
understand why we can't come up with a system that allows people in here legally.
I'm with you, and it is within our capacity to do it. Sometimes the cynical part of me thinks that we don't fix immigration because it's great for politicians to run on. If you're a Democrat, you get to say, you know, if you elect me into office, I'm going to fix the immigration system. Just give me a shot. And if you're a Republican, you say, if you elect me, I'm going to fix the immigration system. Just give me a shot. And it gives you something to run on over and over again when you don't fix it. And both parties have had complete control of Congress, of the presidency at different times over the last 10 years, and neither party has really chosen to make this a priority or to fix it. It's one of the reasons that I think Texas can play a unique role. If we could get Republicans and Democrats together in this state to agree on what the broad principles are, I think we could come up to DC and change what they are able to do there. So would love to have your help in doing that. Thank you, appreciate it. Well, thank you all for coming out, really appreciate it. Thank you all for hosting us. We are grateful to you and look forward to seeing you next time we're in Dalhart. Thank you all very much, appreciate it.